Berlin, October 27, 1961. Checkpoint Charlie. The air has frozen. It is saturated with the stench of diesel exhaust and the acrid smell of cheap Victory tobacco. A low, leaden sky hangs over Friedrichstrasse. Inside the cabin of an M48 American tank, it smells of heated machine oil and sweat. Sergeant Gary Wilson wipes his damp palms against the coarse fabric of his coveralls. His fingers are trembling. 30 meters ahead, Soviet T-54 tanks sit motionless. Their cannons stare directly into the crosshairs of his sight. Steel against steel. Nerves against nerves. The silence presses against the eardrums. It rings like a taut string. The only sound is the low, guttural hum of the air conditioner in the command trailer. On the sidewalk of the western sector stands a crowd. Journalists, onlookers, provocateurs. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoes from the eastern sector. A flash, a loud whistle. It was a simple firecracker thrown by an unseen hand from the window of a half-ruined building. But to Gary Wilson, it is the sound of a gunshot. A survival instinct triggers in his mind. The world narrows to the size of an eyepiece. "Fire!" he screams into his throat microphone without waiting for an order. The heavy Browning machine gun on the tank's turret roars to life. A trail of fire cuts through the gray Berlin air. The crash of gunfire hammers the ears. Spent casings fall onto the cold metal armor with a hollow clinking sound. Bullets bite into the brick walls of buildings beyond the demarcation line. Concrete chips fly in all directions. The screams of people are drowned out in the rising chaos. The Soviet gunner in the hatch of the lead T-54 does not have time to duck. His body is thrown back into the dark void of the fighting compartment. The Soviet platoon commander sees blood on the armor. His response is instantaneous. "High explosive, short burst!" the command barks over the internal radio. The turret of the Soviet tank turns slowly, inevitably. The hydraulics groan. The flash from the T-54's barrel blinds everyone present. The shell flies on a flat trajectory, a direct hit on American Checkpoint Charlie. The explosion turns sandbags, wooden beams, and documents into a cloud of fire. Shreds of the American flag drift slowly into the sticky mud. The sound of a siren from the West Berlin side turns into a hysterical wail. Dust blankets Friedrichstrasse. Through this gray shroud, only the silhouettes of steel monsters remain visible. In a command bunker in Washington, a red lamp lights up on the console. In Moscow, a duty officer of the Committee for State Security breaks the seal on a secret envelope. 15 minutes of skirmishing have destroyed decades of diplomacy. The world that existed this morning has ceased to be reality. Gary Wilson looks at his hands. They are no longer trembling. They have become part of the cold machinery of war. He realizes he has committed something irreversible. But in the sky over Berlin, the rising roar of jet engines is already audible. Operation Ragnarok has begun. History has just torn off its hinges and plunged into the abyss. Washington, the underground command center beneath the White House. The air here is dry, sterile, with an aftertaste of ozone from the functioning electronic computing machines. Alan Dulles, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, slowly lights his pipe. The smoke of expensive Prince Albert tobacco mixes with the scent of fear emanating from the aides de camp. On a massive map of Europe, signals officers shift small flags. A red wave from East Berlin has begun its movement toward the west. "Brinkmanship is over," Dulles says quietly. His voice sounds mundane, almost bored. "We are no longer playing chess. We have moved on to blowing brains out." In his hands is a decrypt of an intercept from Moscow. The Committee for State Security has already begun purging unreliable elements in Warsaw and Prague. Ivan Serov, chairman of the committee, acts efficiently and terrifyingly. Under the guise of humanitarian rescue from American aggression, execution squads transport the remains of the opposition into the forests. The cynicism of the situation is staggering. While tanks burn on the streets of Hanover, Officials in Moscow and Washington are busy saving their seats and destroying archives. At the headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization on the outskirts of Paris, panic reigns. General Hans Speidel, whose Nazi past in these moments seems merely useful experience, stares at the reports. Soviet tank wedges have breached the defenses at the Fulda Gap. His divisions are melting under the strikes of the aviation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Speidel does not wait for an order from the White House. He knows Kennedy will hesitate until the very last moment. The old Prussian soldier believes only in steel and the split atom. His fingers rest on the direct line to the missile crews. Enter the Siegfried codes, Speidel commands. Target: enemy troop concentrations near Magdeburg. May God help us if he has not already abandoned this place. This is an unauthorized decision. It is treason and salvation at the same time. At this very moment, the Central Intelligence Agency is already preparing groups of saboteurs for insertion into the rear of the Soviet Union. Dulles' plan is simple and bloody. Provoke an internal coup in the Kremlin while Europe turns to ash. At airfields in England, U-2 pilots receive cyanide capsules and maps of targets deep inside Siberia. In Moscow, in a cold office at Lubyanka, Ivan Serov coordinates the takeover of the surviving governments of Europe. His agents are already in Paris, already in Rome. They bring not communism, but the iron order of the Committee for State Security. Every action is documented. Every step is aligned with the necessity of stabilizing the region. Europe is a corpse, Serov tells his assistant, looking at the reports of tactical nuclear weapon use. Our task is to be the pathologists who take everything of value before the body cools. Beyond the office walls, millions are dying. But here, in the silence of the dungeons, a different war is being waged. A war over who will write history on the scorched pages of tomorrow. In Washington, preparations begin to evacuate the government deep into the continent. The Fortress America concept ceases to be a theory. The President of the United States of America signs a decree blocking all ports. Europe is abandoned. It has become a bargaining chip in a game where the stake was world domination, and the prize turned out to be a void. The sky over the federal state of Hesse took on a strange, unnatural hue of potassium permanganate. The roar of hundreds of internal combustion engines was replaced by a rising whistle that seemed to come not from above, but from everywhere at once. The air grew thick, like jelly. This was the moment when tactical nuclear weapons ceased to be a point in secret protocols and became a physical reality. The first strike by Hans Speidel hit the concentrations of tank columns of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the Magdeburg area. The flash was of such intensity that birds incinerated mid-flight before they could make a sound. A white sphere expanded at the speed of thought, vaporizing the steel of T-54 tanks along with their crews. In a single instant, the shockwave turned German cities into neat piles of rubble, mixed with human remains. "Target destroyed," croaked a guidance officer in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization bunker. His face, in the light of the lamps, looked like a wax mask. But the response followed immediately. The Committee for State Security had already transmitted the target coordinates to the missile crews. The second wave of fire came from the east. Soviet intermediate-range missiles struck United States of America airfields in Ramstein and the ports of Hamburg. Mushroom clouds rose over Germany, looking like massive poisonous flowers in the glow of the sunset. This was low yield, as they called it in the headquarters. But for the residents of Frankfurt and Munich, this littleness meant the end of the world. Dust kicked up by the explosions carried death. Radioactive ash settled on the fields, poisoning the land for centuries to come. On the outskirts of Hanover, a company of American infantrymen tried to take up a defensive position in a forest. Not a trace remained of the scent of pine resin, only the stench of burnt rubber and scorched flesh. Captain John Miller looked at his dosimeter, its needle off the scale. His men were coughing up blood, yet they continued to load their M14 rifles. "Where is the air support?" he shouted into the radio. "There will be no support, Captain," a distant, static, distorted voice replied. "The United States of America has closed the skies. We are leaving." The betrayal was legally formalized in a matter of hours. The Central Intelligence Agency relayed the order. All surviving units were to fight their way to the ports for evacuation, covering the withdrawal of the main forces. The soldiers became a living shield for officials and gold reserves. In the sky over the Rhine, the last squadrons of interceptors collided. This was not an aerial dogfight. It was a slaughter in a radioactive fog. General Hans Speidel, realizing that his order had turned Germany into a mass grave, shot himself in his office. A map remained on his desk, where black spots gaped in place of Europe. By midnight, the active phase of the battle had quieted down, not because a peace treaty had been signed, but because there was no one left to fight. The radio airwaves filled with white noise and death rattles. The Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic ceased to exist. They turned into the Berlin Rift, a scar on the body of the planet that would never heal. Ivan Serov of the Committee for State Security was already dictating the text of the order to create humanitarian control zones on the ruins, where his soldiers in gas masks finished off those who could still resist. Europe has turned into a massive crypt, illuminated by the ghostly glow of isotopes. What was once called civilization has disintegrated into thousands of isolated pockets of survival. Central authority vanished along with telephone lines and power grids. In place of thriving cities, there are now smoldering husks of concrete and rusted iron. The smell of ozone has been replaced by the unbearable stench of decay and wet ash. Those who survived the first hours of the exchange were faced with a new reality. Former bank clerks and Volkswagen factory workers now huddle into gangs, armed with kitchen knives and scavenged M14 rifles. The only currency has become clean water, canned goods, and 7.62 caliber cartridges. Central Europe has become a patchwork quilt of microstates. In the basements of ruined Frankfurt, remnants of United States of America garrisons have entrenched themselves, declaring martial law over a territory of 3 city blocks. In Thuringia, surviving officers of the National People's Army of the German Democratic Republic have established their own military junta, executing anyone who approaches their food warehouses without a permit. "Order is the only thing that separates us from beasts," says a captain of the Committee for State Security, standing guard at a temporary checkpoint near Leipzig. His face is hidden by the rubber mask of a gas mask. Only inflamed eyes are visible through the fogged lenses. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has officially declared the entire territory of the former Germany a humanitarian disaster zone. But behind this phrasing lies a brutal cleansing. Special forces groups from the Committee for State Security comb the ruins in search of surviving technologies and specialists. Everyone else is driven into filtration camps, where life lasts exactly as long as a person can hold a shovel. The United States of America has finally turned inward. The Fortress America program has turned the Atlantic Ocean into an impassable barrier. The last transport ships leaving the ports of Bremen were overcrowded with elites and military command. Ordinary soldiers and civilians, abandoned to their fate, watched the departing ships as radioactive snow covered their shoulders. In small Bavarian villages that miraculously escaped direct hits, life has frozen in the Middle Ages. People plow the land by hand, looking warily at the horizon where the sky still glows an ominous green at night. There are no ideologies here, no capitalism or socialism. There is only the fear of black rain and marauders who come from the dead cities. The map of the region now resembles an anatomical atlas after an autopsy. Borders no longer follow rivers or mountains. They follow radiation levels and the zones of influence of warlords. The old world died in October '61. In its place grew the hideous fruit of Operation Ragnarok, a territory of eternal winter and endless infighting for the right to live through one more gray, joyless day. Berlin, February 2026. A heavy reconnaissance drone circles over the ruins of the Brandenburg Gate, scanning the debris with infrared sensors. There are no birds here. There are no trees. Only an endless concrete labyrinth covered in a layer of gray dust that has not settled for 65 years. The voice of the announcer from the loudspeaker at the armored post sounds flat and dispassionate. It is the voice of an artificial intelligence, keeping the chronicle of the Berlin Rift. Today, the radiation level in the middle sector exceeds the norm by 70 times, the machine reports. Entry is forbidden to civilians. Intruders will be eliminated by automated turrets. In 2026, the world has long since grown accustomed to this scar on the map of Europe. The great catastrophe of October 61 became the foundation of a new reality. The United States of America, locked within its fortress, has transformed into a technological theocracy where every resource is accounted for. They no longer save the world. They merely send mercenaries from private military companies here to guard mobile laboratories. Their goal is technology. In the dungeons where the headquarters of the Committee for State Security and the Central Intelligence Agency once stood, sealed server rooms and archives are still being discovered. Chinese corporations and American consortiums wage an endless proxy war here. Snipers in stealth suits hunt each other in the ruins of the Reichstag, fighting for hard drives containing data from 60 years ago. Europe is a massive Chernobyl, a closed zone where human life is worth less than a liter of synthetic fuel. A third generation of zone people has grown up here, mutants of the social system, living by the laws of military juntas and religious cults that worship the holy atom. Operation Ragnarok did not end with explosions, continues the voice of the narrator from the future. It continues in every shot fired by a mercenary, in every deal for purified water. We have created a world where peace is simply the absence of targets to strike. In the archives of 2026, the name of Sergeant Gary Wilson has been erased. The accidental firecracker that decided the fate of humanity has become a myth. But deep underground, in shielded bunkers, the orders of Ivan Serov and Alan Dulles are still preserved. They won. Their cynicism became the law of nature. The division of Europe, which began with a single machine gun burst at Checkpoint Charlie, has led to a world where, in 2026, the concepts of freedom and democracy are considered dangerous archaisms. All that remains is the logic of survival and the hum of air conditioners in hermetically sealed dome cities. The Berlin Rift is a mirror that humanity is afraid to look into, because it sees there not a monster, but itself, pulling the trigger out of ordinary fear. History has frozen. In 2026, time in Europe no longer moves forward. It moves in a circle around radioactive ash, waiting for the final breath of the planet.